All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the ENAiBLE webinar. Today, we're going to talk about robotics in retail and service, considerations for employees. Let me first introduce myself. I am Raylan Musaraka, and I'm an assistant teaching professor at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute here at the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. And more relevant for today, I am one of the co-leaders of ENAiBLE, a retail and services collaborative, which is a joint venture between CMU School of Computer Science, the Tepper School of Business, and the College of Fine Arts. As many of you know, but for the benefit for those who are new to our webinar, ENAiBLE is a unique forum aimed at the retail and service industries, and we're looking to meet the needs of customers on how they make advances in design and technology. There's a lot more information on our website you can see here if you go to cmu.edu/ENAiBLE. And I do want to thank our sponsor, the Home Depot, who partners very closely with us on different topics and different ways that we can engage with the retail and services industry. Just a few logistics before we jump into the webinar, just about the webinar logistics. This event is on record and is currently being recorded. And we definitely encourage you to ask questions and participate. So I am going to be monitoring the Q&A function. And if you have questions while we are talking and discussing, put those in there and I will try to jump to them and address them. And if we don't address them during the main part of the discussion, we definitely have dedicated Q&A time at the end of today's talk. So you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom function, there is a Q&A button that you can use to send those questions to me, and then I'll bring them into the discussion. So with that, I really want to get started. I'm excited about our panelists today. Today's discussion is really going to focus on the complexities that arise when you introduce robotics or other AI algorithms into employee-centric product and service ecosystems. We really want to kind of discuss employee considerations when you're designing these new services that rely on robotics and artificial intelligence. Before we jump into the discussion, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I'm going to give them a few minutes each to talk about their role at the university, their research interests, and how those interests intersect with the retail and services spaces. First, I'm going to start with Jodi Forlizzi. She is the Herbert A. Simon Professor in Computer Science and Human-Computer Interaction, and she is also the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the School of Computer Science. Jodi, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Hi, Raylan. Thank you. And thanks, everybody, for allowing me to visit today. So I'm a designer by training, and I study the impacts of AI and automation in many forms, including robots and algorithms that track and manage workers. I've had a long career as the first design faculty in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University, and I like to think of myself as an accidental vagrant. That is, an animal which thrives in a context where they don't traditionally belong. So land birds might live on sea and thrive. So all kinds of animals can become accidental vagrants, and they serve as creative and innovative solutions for positive change within an ecosystem. And so it is with me, with my background in service and systems design. And really what I want to stress today in our discussions is that the specific context where these technologies are rolled out, industry segments and workplaces, really impacts the extent and type of technology adopted and the implications for workers. And it's never implemented in isolation from the context. So that's one theme I'll be bringing through in my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Mario Savvides. He's the Bossa Nova Robotics Professor of Artificial Intelligence, Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he's also the director of the CyLab Biometrics Center. Marios, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you, Raylan. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak today. So I started my career at Carnegie Mellon as faculty, and for a good decade and a half, I've worked on really biometrics, so facial recognition. How can we identify someone regardless if they're looking forward if they're off angle, low resolution. And in 2017-18 timeframe, I had a startup which got acquired by Bossa and I became the chief AI scientist, where we pivoted and started doing retail analytics and building basically all the visual AI for the Bossa robots. So we faced a lot of challenges on scaling AI from 15 stores, 15 robots to 550 stores and 550 robots. And that's been my latest research is how did me and my team at Carnegie Mellon do that, remove human in the loop and actually make this AI scale. So we do a lot of work in product identification, facial recognition, object identification, and I'll touch upon the challenges in scaling AI, making it work robustly, and what are the problems being faced in the workplace and that employees face. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Marius. Thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we could jump into our conversation with each other. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off this with a question that came from our audience, because it kind of generally touches on the topics that we want to talk about today. So we can kind of get started with a general discussion. So our audience member asked, if research shows that making robots fun and friendly improves both customer and employee experience, how do we encourage the development of machines that are welcomed in work and retail spaces versus having false starts of platforms that have not been well engineered for improving positive experiences for workers and customers? So with that, I saw Jodi shaking her head. Maybe you'll go ahead and start. And then Marius, I know you had experience in implementation as well, so you can follow with Jodi's lead.
So that's a great question, whoever submitted it. Thank you. So much to say here. I think that even with Bossa Nova, we saw early on when I was working with the team, really different responses to the same robot in different pilot locations. So in some contexts, shoppers were very interested in the robot and would come up and experiment with it. And in other contexts, people would see the robot at the top of the aisle, spin their cart and go somewhere else. And so I really think that the design of the robot and the interaction is just one small part, because we also need to think about what kind of industry is it? What's the concentration of technology? What's the maturation of technology? What's the customer base like? And what are the labor markets like? And all of these come together really to inform that design of the robot interaction.
That's you're spot on, Jodi, and that's kind of also what we saw. So there's definitely a UI UX equivalent in the robotics design, right? And I've talked to other folks in the industry, you know, Badger Robotics and other folks who also developed similar robots, and they had interesting stories too, where like, okay, do we, you know, we put, you know, like Sesame Street style faces on their robots, and kids love them more. You know, in the Bossa Nova robots, we've had kids come up and like, we want to hug the robot, which is great, but also bad for the robot, because now we have to make sure, okay, the robot stops, doesn't do anything, make sure we don't run over anyone, right? So there's a huge safety element that we spent a lot of effort making sure is 100% robust. But yes, I think, you know, one battle that I faced in the facial recognition community that I think is bled over to retail, Hollywood has done an amazing job of scaring people with technology. So some people want robots. Some people think of robot, you know, little Tommy robot, I want robot. And others are like, oh my God, scared, robot, you know. So everyone behaves differently, and we can't, it's hard to really account for that, right? Other than make sure that it's safe. It tries to appear as friendly as possible. And contrary to what many people think, we actually really put a big effort to try to make the robot as less humanoid as possible, because having humanoid robots apparently actually are more scary and less welcoming. So there's a huge behavioral and psychological factor that unfortunately is very diverse. So there is no right answer. There is no right or wrong answer. Exactly as Jodi mentioned, what we have seen is really has a wide spectrum.
I guess I want to deepen what Mario said by just saying that there's lots of robots out there. We have a corpus of examples growing. We have robots that meet, greet, clean, surveil, transport, deliver products and services, automate coffee making, salad making, all these different things, all different functions, all different interactions with employees and customers. So, one type of investigation is to simply look at what's out there right now.
Right. But actually, building exactly upon what Jodi said, the good thing is because there is that wide variety now, we are accepting it. The society is accepting robots more and more. They're getting more accustomed. And I'll give one example that I borrowed from the biometric side. Fingerprint recognition was a big stigma. People hate it. We said, oh, I'm going to use fingerprint to identify myself for access control or computer. They would say, no way. But look what Apple did, right? Apple, with their first generation iPhones, introduced fingerprint on their cell phones. And suddenly that got widely adopted. People are now desensitized. They're more accepting of technology. So the more introduction, the more deployment of robotics, the more we're going to erase this past scariness of technology. And I think it's only going to get better.
On that note, one of the things I have seen in the research when we have taken these different robotic systems and put them into these environments where both consumers and employees interact with them, whether that's on the floor of a retail store or in a warehouse. And some of it may depend on the design, and you hit upon this, children hugging the robot, right? Is sort of trust in the robotics can be a very delicate lever when you're talking about employees in particular and employee productivity. And that research kind of shows that some employees can overtrust the robot, which could lead to some difficulties, while other employees don't trust the robot at all, which could lead to difficulties in sort of working closely and in harmony with that robot. So can both of you touch upon this aspect of sort of balancing that and some things that you may have seen in your implementations?
Mario, you should go first. We should take turns.
Okay. All right. No worries. Thanks, Jodi. Yeah, there's many ways to answer this. And I think one of them is about, showing what is the value proposition of the robotic system to the employee, right? And that's the number one thing we as designers need to answer is we have to show that this system is helping them. The moment we can show that this is improving their life, that it can do inventory much more robust, they don't have to go and spend time going through every aisle. I mean, if you think about inventory and making sure products are compliant and product facing exactly, you can imagine an employee going around scanning 4-foot section by 4-foot section, one aisle after aisle. That's a very mundane job that honestly they hate. This is where they're like, I'd love if a robot can just go and scan and just tell me, okay, go replace, I need more ketchup in this aisle, I need to get more mustard here, and I put more Campbell's soup, right? So that doing those kind of jobs is the easy part of robotics. And I think it's one of those that are slam dunk. And I think that the employees really welcome that. The question is, the AI has to be robust, meaning it has to be able to come with a good inventory analysis. Otherwise, the employees end up having to go and double check the system. And that's part of the main research and the value that we brought in as Carnegie Mellon developing some of the AI is making that robust so that it is actually adding value. And I can talk about more of that later. But Jodi, I'll jump to you.
Thank you. So some of the other things that I thought about is, again, as I talked about in the introduction, there's a lot of factors that influence implementation and rollout of this kind of technology. The cost and the ROI, the features, the organizational structures, and how the workers and customers will accept it. And it needs to be done transparently and with good planning to hit on the important things. And a lot of times Not talking about Bossa specifically now, but some of the other case studies we've looked at in our research, the technology implementation happens in a very haphazard fashion because even across a brand or a chain or a franchise, there are a lot of differences in how the technology needs to be situated and how workers work and what the task flow is. So it can be very confusing and complex to bring in these kinds of technologies. And oftentimes, change managers are elected to run this, but many times they're not. And workers are just elevated because they're facile with technology. Now you're going to manage or lead this process, and then breakdowns begin to occur, which can lead to eradication of trust.
Once you, when somebody says, let's try out this X, this robot, this algorithm to do this thing in the store, what would you say would be the first thing an organization might want to consider or to do to ensure that they're getting on the right track for planning?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So I think that, of course, the goal would be for a system to run entirely autonomously eventually, but people will play a huge part in helping to facilitate this service. And the way that workers are positioned in this loop is super important. They need to be positioned as valued components in the data collection and algorithm development, not commodities that could be fired like an algorithm. So you can look at case studies of Amazon workers, UPS workers, package delivery systems, and you can see how human workers are held in respect there. And I think that's super important.
And I agree about that. I think the other element is when we're considering sort of AI being adopted and being used by employees, it's important we set the expectations of what the AI can and cannot do. Because many times we think, oh, AI is amazing, it's smart, it can do everything, right? And suddenly there's high expectations and there's failure cases. I'll give an example, and I'll shift towards the biometrics area, facial recognition. Facial recognition, people think, oh, it's spot on, it's 100%, right? It's not always 100%, and it's not meant to be 100%. And to Jodi's point about human in the loop, we want the people looking and verifying, right? In fact, in facial recognition, we absolutely want human in the loop. We don't want someone to be stopped because of the system came alert. It's always a lead generation. It's alert the security. They'll verify, is this the person that looks here that maybe, you know, was caught stealing several times? And if so, then go ahead and do action or whatever the business case rules are for that case. So in those cases, it's very important to have human in the loop to make sure that the outcome, both from an employee and even customer perspective, is a positive one. Other cases, you don't want human in the loop. Other cases, like you know, if you're doing inventory, you don't want any human in the loop. You want to make sure that the algorithm does that in a fast fashion. And a lot of the current AI, unfortunately, is not always 100% autonomous, and that's more on the algorithm side. Many stores, and in Bossa Nova, that was the case when before we were brought on. The algorithms actually had human in the loop, meaning there was an algorithm that went and did inventory, and then there was human verifying that the out of stocks were actually correct before they were released to Walmart. And that was a bottleneck. That was a huge bottleneck. And so removing human in the loop was an algorithmic challenge that we faced on. And I'll talk about later. I think, you know, we have a huge, you know, we'll be talking about human in the loop later. That, but these are all design considerations, and every AI problem has a different way you handle and introduce or not introduce human in the loop, and how you deal with employees and getting their trust.
Thank you, Marius. Jodi, on that question, we can actually move to that. We can kind of let this discussion flow, because I think this concept of humans in the loop or not in the loop, you know, there are pluses and benefits, as Marius was talking about. What do you see are pros and cons of both sides of this type of robotic or algorithm implementation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I probably am a little biased because I'm going to assert that the human side is very valuable. Even when workers aren't performing the tasks, I think we still need humans to tend and monitor the AI and the system. One aspect of service work, which retail, hospitality, banking, and many other industries are part of, is that there is emotional and social work that happens in these roles, even for people stocking shelves in an organization. And I think that that is an important component of work that autonomous technology cannot do. And so for that reason, I would say we always need humans in the loop.
And then I agree. I think humans in the loop have different performance, right? You want humans in the loop, and as Jodi's mentioned, is the sort of the customer experience and very quickly AI is working. And the kind of human in the loop that I was talking before was more on the algorithmic side. As people are training algorithms and trying to get them to scale, sometimes because the algorithm is not mature, there's human in the loop just verifying the output before it's released to the employees and whatnot. But I think there's two different kinds of human in the loop that we're talking about, and I absolutely agree with Jodi from an employee perspective and just verifying the technology, verifying how a robot or AI technology's perspective. You want that other human in the loop to just have a good customer experience, right, or employee experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think this discussion for me brings this back up another level again for me, which kind of goes to a larger question of, when people think about implementing automation in retail and service environments, there was a lot of thought about replacing common tasks like shelf stocking or checkout. But then also people go to physical retail environments to have an interaction, or they would just order it on Amazon and get it in a couple of hours, right? So they go to have an interaction, to greet with people, right? So when you are thinking about implementing the automation and thinking about this new design or this new ecosystem, like Marios, I'm going to go back to you next.
Sure.
In these experiences, what did you learn about that so that you can maintain this balance of people serving people versus the robots and or other algorithms really kind of taking over more of the mundane tasks?
I think that's spot on. In fact, that's exactly what even retailers want, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go shopping nowadays, there's two things I notice. There's an increased number of self-checkout lanes that are absolutely not easy to use. There's less associates to help because there's a lot of problems with self-checkout lanes. And I can almost never find someone to help me find something in the store. I'm sure that many of our audience members resonate with that common theme. So I'll address both the sort of the inventory issue, but even from a self-checkout perspective, AI, currently a lot of the self-checkout is just barcode scanned, and it's not intuitive. It really takes somebody who knows how to barcode scan to do a good job and fast. And it's just people do not. We as humans or customers are not good barcode scan. You're taking the product and you're checking it out, and then you can't do it right, and then it doubles beeps, and then you're calling the associate to come over. So the associate is spending actually more time trying to help you barcode scan, which they should just be helping out you with a better customer experience. And that's the funny part about that is the barcode scan is an AI technology that is meant to help, right? But it actually is not helping. So instead, and some of the things that we're working on is visual AI scanning, not barcode scan, where the system actually recognizes the product just by looking at it. Now that does two things. That is a much quicker experience, because if you can see where the product is, so that the camera and identify what it is. And it also takes away the shrinkage problem, because what a lot of the employees are doing there are looking to see, are people trying to game the system? Are people basically doing this finger scanning where they put a barcode on their fingertip and they're having a product on top and they're scanning a $1 chewing gum as this, $20 item is being passed on. That would be naturally caused by the visual AI checkout system. And that's actually something we're working on right now. And I can talk about more of that later. So that's where a smarter design of an AI system can actually help reduce what the customer associates are actually doing. Because in the latter case, in the former case with the barcode scanning, it's not helping them. It's actually giving them more work. It's adding more frustration to them and the customers. And suddenly you're stressing a system that AI was introduced to actually reduce a number of people. And now you're actually requiring more cycles of someone to help an AI system that shouldn't be. So visual AI is better than just barcode. And I think that's a design issue that I think will solve itself as people change towards that. I can go on much more, but Jodi's nodding her head, so I want her to jump in here and
Yeah, so in labor management, the division of tasks is often classified either as low road or high road. And low road is simply where, AI and autonomous technologies are used to flatten the task flow. And high road is where there's a more purposeful consideration of AI and automation and the really important aspects of front-facing workers' efforts are preserved. And in general, in service, it's shown that service quality diminishes when AIs and robots are put in place. And so I think we really need to think about how the technology is positioned and how that's sort of posed in the psychology of workers, managers, shoppers, et cetera, and really think about it as an intermediary between retail processes as they currently exist, not anything that's going to replace or augment. So I think that much of this is philosophical. It can be driven by case studies in labor and HR, and there are some guidelines that the industry can look to.
I agree. In fact, some retailers, especially in the self-checkout, they actually want a better checkout system so the customers can check out, and the employee, instead of checking out, they'd rather have them bagging or talking to the customer, so they have actually a better experience. Because to both your points, we can all order things on Amazon. We want to go to the store because it's also a social experience. We're looking at products, we're interacting. And we want to talk to someone, and we don't want to talk to a robot. We want to talk to someone who would ask us, how was your day? Well, did you find this? By the way, this is cheaper here. This is something else is there, rather than them just scrambling to get the checkout done fast, right? So
yeah, and I think that basic checkout is an example of low road technology implementation. We're going to automate this checkout task, and boy, nobody thought about the fact that we would still need oversight by human workers.
Right.
So this concept, I want to kind of bring this back around even maybe to my earlier question of like, one thing that you can do when your company starts talking about these technologies is this concept of low road and high road, Jodi, is why are we considering this technology and how are we considering it? If you're looking at it from a pure cost profitability point of view, you're going to miss a bunch of things with your employees in your ecosystem. If you're looking at it more from a, how can this technology help our employees do a better job, then you're going to be able to design a more successful ecosystem where they coexist and you're enabling in your employees. Is that?
Yes, I think that's a really nice summation. And I'll just give an example from some of our current research, which is happening in hospitality. So we went and studied these robot bartenders. Surely people have seen them or maybe even had a drink made by one of them that serve free drinks in the casinos. And we interviewed bartenders and cocktail servers, many who had worked 25 or 30 years in the industry, about these machines. And they were implemented as cost and labor saving structures, but they actually increased cost and increased labor because they make drinks very slowly. They make terrible drinks. The drinks are weak. If you have a Bloody Mary followed by a Bailey's and cream, you get a science experiment. If you order 4 rum and cokes, a human bartender can make that very quickly, but a robot makes them one at a time, even though they're just the same thing. Wiping was required. Rounding was slower, so cocktail servers made fewer tips, and they stashed alcohol under the machine so they could top off the drinks to get their tips. So this is a really classic instance of this idea that we're going to save labor and we're going to save costs on liquor, when in fact they weren't doing either of those things.
And that's a classic example of essentially almost, you know, when we do things for the Marines, they always say one thing: if it's too heavy and doesn't work well, they'll just literally drop it off the cliff. Oops, sorry, I just lost this device. Same thing here, right? That's Jodi was saying. We put the alcohol at the bottom, we'll top it up because robot is too slow. It's not doing a good job. So this is where the AI has to be designed to do value add and work at the speed and complement the person, not slow them down. And I think, Jodi, that was a great example of actually the technology slowing down and actually reducing the tips and with the wage of what a normal server would normally get.
Mm-hmm. So I think, Mario, since some of your experience and some of where you're going with some of the technologies, sort of based on some of these lessons learned, where are you headed with some of the technology that could actually, you know, it does the task well so that you're not actually creating more work for the employee or the customer?
Some of the research that we're doing right now, and we're doing some pilot studies, is actually large-scale product ID. And that's something that, you know, we didn't have quite yet in Bossa Nova. We did a lot of sort of, are these products out of stock? Are we detecting if there's spreads, which was basically the employees gaming the system? You know, back then, one of the issues that retailers had were employees would basically find a hole because it's a product behavior, and then they would just move a product over to cover that gap. Oh, everything's in stock. So we had to detect algorithms there. So what we've done now is full large-scale product, visual product ID, whether it's inventory for a robot or whether it's a self-checkout. And the implementation of this has three things. It has, you can do robust inventory, you can do fast checkout, self-checkout, because again, I don't know about you, but even though I'm tech, I still have a hard time scanning a barcode. I'm still shifting the product different angles to find where the barcode is. You know, I can do a much quicker self-checkout. And I don't know if I have a chance to show a quick video to have an opportunity.
Sure.
Let me quickly show a quick demonstration of our visual AI. So here's
experience, intensity, system-only product detection and recognition from any angles.
So
the system only needs to intake one single image from the product in order to recognize it. As you see in this video, the system recognizes the product as soon as it is placed on the counter. It can process a large number of products quickly. As soon as the customer places the product in the counter view, it's recognized instantly. The accuracy of the detection
and you
replace the barcode scanner and create a very smooth, high throughput checkout experience. As you see from this video.
So
wow, that would be a much better experience than what I today.
And that's just using one camera. Retailers are building on multiple cameras. So if you can see what product is, it already does. And you can't cheat. You can't, like, you know, put the whole fingerprint thing where you have the barcode at the bottom. It sees exactly what you're passing through, and it's fast. Everything's running on an embedded device. And actually in there, we have basically a database of 220,000 products doing that matching. So same technology could be used in inventory scanning if it was a robot or whatnot, but that's a much easier experience. You don't, you can identify produce, you know, that's the great thing about visual AI, you can do produce. Whereas, you know, biggest challenge I have with produce is hard to find the right, because they don't have the barcode, or they don't have the thing. You have to go find and key it in. This is where I think the retail industry is not doing a smart UI UX customer experience design. It's a combination of AI and the human experience. I think that's lacking, but I also see it coming. That's the thing, and this is one example of how this technology can revolutionize, I think, self-checkout as one of the aspects.
Thank you, Marius. I think
I guess I'm sorry, can I just add one thing before we go on? I think the call for UX is super important. What's lacking is UX designers who are trained to be capable with AI. So technical teams can make really cool things that people don't want to use, and designers can make things that people desire, but they don't readily grasp the capabilities of AI. So that suggests to me that we need some new training in the field to design these interfaces between systems and regular old people.
Thank you, Jodi.
I agree.
Thank you. I do want to encourage our audience to submit questions in the Q&A. We've been talking. I think we might break in a little bit. I have a couple more questions myself for Jodi and Marios, but if you want to go ahead and submit your questions or your thoughts, or I saw on our attendee list several retailers. So if you've had some experiences that you want to share with us, I'll be happy to share those from the Q&A. So go ahead at this point. I just want to encourage the audience that we're watching that. And then back to the point you were just making, Jodi, one of the issues I have seen in these implementations, knowing how to work with algorithms or how to work with robotic implementations from a service design point of view or an internal team point of view really is about designing the whole system, designing different roles, and then training people in those systems. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of why it's so important to think about role clarity when you're putting a system like this in place?
Sure. I mean, I think that as we have been saying in this past hour, these ecosystems are particularly complicated and require a lot of thought and a lot of kind of strategic management to make sure that all efforts are streamlined. And I'm sure Marios, having worked on the front line at Bossa Nova, can talk about this. And a lot of times technology is being iterated upon so quickly that there is no strategy in place and things just roll forward. One of the critical areas, I think, to examine in the development process is probably that of the project manager, because they have to coordinate all these work streams when technology gets designed and implemented. And they also often fall to becoming the advocate for the user. So, for example, data privacy, who's thinking about that? Are we following regulations? Is that being put down as a second level thing because we're trying to get to the MVP? There's a lot of questions about that.
Thank you. Marios?
That's a great point, Jodi. In fact, one of the things we're looking at is exactly, the robot scanning, it has navigation, right? It's looking for obstacles, it's going to detect people. So part of the things we had to do and look at is also, blurring out faces, right? To be GDPR or whatever compliant and whatnot. So those are all small details, but very important details, especially when you're working towards an MVP. Yeah, there's a lot of issues in reliability. Robotic systems break down. I mean, I think one time a robot caught fire because of an issue. We had to go fix some manufacturing wiring component that heated up, right? So there's things that you find that you don't expect. And also the retail world is it's a Wild West. People do not behave. People leave shopping carts everywhere. If you put a robot in the retail world and expect it to be that perfect, oh yeah, here's the path plan, you're going to go to this aisle and turn this aisle, It will have every single obstacle you can ever dream of. Not imagine, but dream of. Because shopping carts, people will come actually around the robot with shopping carts. The employees will actually stand up end caps. So even the aisles themselves keep changing at a whim's notice. People will add things or restock, especially at night when they're restocking, right? It's a challenge for me sometimes to go shopping at night, yet alone a robot that's trying to do inventory at those times. So there's a lot of logistics about when do you have these robotic systems go out and actually do their jobs. Because if it's during peak time, there are too many people, it's going to end up just skipping aisles and having to do. And if it's off peak times, it's got to make sure it's not when they're restocking. So, and you don't want it when there's no one there because there's an issue and you need to service something or make sure the robot, went back into charge itself. There's a lot of, and as Jodi mentioned, a lot of details that project managers, people who check have to make sure everything, safety, compliance, reliability, mean time between failure, all those things. It's a large and very important detailed list of very, very small items that add up.
Yeah, you're kind of reminding me of some of my experience working at American Eagle Outfitters and implementing new technologies and the size of the internal team that you need to think about this. And I think it goes to the point Jodi was making earlier, not just about, a lot of times it's technology, so we default to the user experience team. And they not only have, not having experience working with this technology, but then also they don't have the broad perspective of all the things that happen in the stores and the things that happen with employees and the things that could happen from a legal point of view. So when embarking on a project of this nature, I think you're hitting on it, but I think I want to make this valuable for the retailers that are watching this, that if you're going to embark on a project with technology, like who's your go-to team internally that you're going to call upon to help you put this initiative in place?
And let me add, because really just running with some interesting wild stories that we had. One time, I think that they had some wire across the store, and basically the robot tripped on it and got stuck, so he couldn't move, and it was endlessly trying to move. What ended up happening is it got an alert. So the robot did have we had a remote operating center. Basically, if there was a problem, it would revert to telemetry. So basically teleoperate. So a remote would log on and try to move the robot to go. Of course, the robot at that point couldn't move because it was stuck. And after a while, battery ran out, so you couldn't. So we had to rely on an associate to basically go and move the robot back to the charging station to charge. And that's where you need to train again. Jodi's point, you train employees, like how can they do something and how do they correct it without damaging the robot or some other component of the robot. And you would never think about all these things. You think, well, I have a teleoperating mode on, so if something goes on, I can alert, and then somebody will then manually take control of the robot and put it in the charging station. Great, but what if it's stuck and it can't, and you need to call someone, call an associate, and get someone to come up quickly enough. All small details that all just have to be thought ahead of time. And sometimes, hindsight is 20/20. You learn these things as you go and experience and find these problems.
Yeah, I appreciate those frontline stories. I think they're really important. I just want to say again that the composition of the team will depend on the particular context, and it may always be different because different locations, even within the same retail organization, may have different social acceptance. There may be different regulations from state to state. So there's a lot of things that could be very different from place to place. I think some of the successful things that I've seen in my industry studies of robots and algorithms is to have a change management team that works across functions in a company and really serves to uphold and implement the strategy of moving to automation. We saw this in some of the large hotel chains we studied, and hotels are really unique because the brand, ownership, and management can all be different. So there's a lot of ways that a hotel property can be fragmented. But these change management teams worked across properties. They met routinely almost every day, and they looked at the algorithmic systems coming on board and the ones that were in place. And they compared notes, and they went deeply into the data, checking, doing spot checks to see if processes were unfolding the way that they were supposed to. And I think maybe Marios can comment on this, but I believe that there's enormous amounts of data generated, probably more than is utilized or analyzed. So another idea is, how can we mine this data for other decisions about how to optimize our process? Could we make HR decisions, for example, about retentions or raises or promotions? Could we get more familiar with the data that's coming out? Could we make that data more transparent, less transparent? Could we use it for new innovations and new services? So I think those are all things to think about.
Thank you, Jodi. Marius, do you have a comment on the last part? Of
Yeah,
that,
I mean, data
you're like, that's a good
robots.
thought.
Yeah, where do I start? I think Jodi just opened up the Pandora's box of data analytics, right, coming out of robots. I mean, if you think about what we're doing in Bossa Nova and in terms of inventory analysis, knowing, and again, we're scanning the store 3 times a day. So knowing frequency of even products being bought, you suddenly know how to pre-stock some items and get that going even faster. But even more so, I always thought about, how can we even use a robot to maybe even help a customer to go find a product, right? I mean, when you can't find an associate, that's useful data, useful information. Security cameras looking at the traffic pattern, or even there's robots that detect spills, right? Are there some aisles being spilled more often? Why? Why is that? Because they're not cleaning it properly? Is there something causing cause some of the spill? Is somebody slipping and falling? There's so much data being generated that I don't think we have thought about how to capitalize, whether it's for helping the retailer or helping the customer. The applications are endless, and the robots or AI generating, whether it's security cameras, facial recognition. I mean, I don't know where to start. There's a million use cases. So, Jodi, we can go on this. I think you and I for like days on end.
We could have many more webinars about
Lots more stories. Yeah.
Jodi, I think in a lot of this discussion, I think just because it naturally, we kind of have fallen into particularly the self-checkout or the robots. And in your example, you were just talking about the hotel. And and I know when we were preparing for this, you had mentioned about, is it just robots or other algorithms? What other algorithms do companies think about implementing that they may not be thinking about its impact on this total employee consumer ecosystem? I know that there are some tools that's kind of scan traffic, or there are concerns there. So what kind of other algorithms have you seen and that we think people should take a closer look at?
Yeah, I would group them into 5 major categories. Probably co-robots and robotics, VR and AR, algorithmic managers, robotic process management, and maybe internets of things. Those might be 5 main categories of technologies involving AI that could be used in commercial settings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those are sort of areas that if you're internal to a company and you're thinking about implementing something new in those areas, maybe kind of take a step back and making sure that you're doing a total sort of service design and you're thinking about the whole ecosystem.
I would suspect that companies look at workflow and they look at how they could save costs or modify labor. And those are good, but I would encourage companies when developing strategies and change plans to really think richly around the context, because the context is very unique. And the other thing I'll say is things can be learned from case studies, even in other industries.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Okay, we're wrapping up close to time. Oh, Marius, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Go ahead.
I think this is great points. I mean, from a retailer, I keep thinking about two things. How do I get more money in? How do you get more customers in the store, right? So analytics to entice the customers to come in, whether it's coupons or some kind of way to get more people in. And then how do I lose money? How do I reduce the money lost out, which is the shrinkage or loss prevention? So I can think there's a lot of AI that can be developed in terms of reducing the shrinkage and reducing loss prevention. I think those are two large areas that I think would be very interesting to retailers.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that actually kind of goes to the last question that I see here from our audience, which is kind of a big question we haven't talked a lot about, but in terms of some of these technologies, the image recognition, the facial recognition, right? Biometrics, even just algorithms making decisions, right? We know there's a lot of high profile publicized issues when these technologies are implemented. So maybe we'll kind of close with this last question and your advice on that. How do you balance the sort of social equality issues when using these new technologies in environments where people are exposed to them, with protecting things like privacy and safety?
I'll take the first snip on that.
Go first, okay.
And I'll answer it from an algorithmic designing point of view, because I think one of the topics that you touched upon right now is sort of the ethnic bias, the biases, right? What is the AI bias? And I think one way that at least we here at my lab where we're working on is using synthetic data. So if we generate synthetic data of different ethnicities, different age groups, then we're training the algorithm such that it will not have a bias because the training data was not balanced correctly and may have a problem because it can't recognize some ethnic groups, right? That's been one topic that has huge attention, not just now, but for a couple of years now. And that spills over to any AI problem. And it's the long tail distribution problem. So we've done a lot of work in being able to do robust product ID, and it's using some of these things to have, a fusion of explainable AI technology and also reducing the bias introduced so that it doesn't work well for some cases, some classes, and has some problems with some fine-grained problems. So these are large research topics that continue to be things we're working on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jodi?
I first want to concur with the question asker that this is a huge and unexplored area. And even though surveillance in the workplace was a research topic as early as the 70s and 80s, there really hasn't been a lot of advance recently with the abundance of emerging technology. So I would say as a designer, one of the things that we need is privacy mitigating design and development process. Bias mitigating design and development processes. So if you bring a group of stakeholders to the table around something like implementing algorithmic managers in the workplace, there will be a set of people who are totally for it, and there will be a set of people who are totally against it. We should never have this because, and we need processes to surface these biases, first in the development, but then in how the algorithms will be waged on the user, right? The person being surveilled. So this, I think, is a super rich research area. And I think there's going to be much more to come there.
Thank you, Jodi. Thank you. Marius, anything you want to add?
I concur. It's a huge field, and there's I'll just leave it at that. Facial recognition. If I open a can of worms, we won't be able to close it.
Yes, I know. It was a big question at the end of the webinar that I was like, wish we had more time or a whole nother webinar that we could do. So I think with that, I really want to thank you for your time. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up the end of the show here. So I want to go ahead and reshare and tell our audience about another opportunity to engage with ENAiBLE. And let me take us to the last screen here. So thank you for your time today. Jodi, Marios, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge on this topic. There can be plenty of opportunities if you're interested in learning more about anything that Jodi and Marios talked about. Please reach out to us at ENAiBLE. Chris Kissel usually wraps these up for us. He helps lead this effort. There's an email address here, enable@cmu.edu, where you can reach out to us and get in touch about this topic and other topics. ENAiBLE offers a variety of programming, including private roundtables with our sponsors, deeper dives into topics of your choice with some of the different research that we do here at CMU, recruitment opportunities with CMU students, and as well as just sort of opportunities to discuss and share topics of interest with your peers in conjunction with other faculty and people at CMU that are also working on these topics. I do want our next event, we try to hold a monthly event. Our next event is going to be in cooperation with the Tepper School of Business and their Corporate Startup Lab Forum. They have a whole day of programming scheduled for Wednesday, November 16th, and ENAiBLE is working in collaboration with them to sponsor part of that programming. The theme for their event is Technology for Innovation's Sake. We have a couple of different speakers from across the university, and the ENAiBLE portion of that forum is really going to focus on the key role technology has changed in transforming retail. We're going to have a panel discussion from several retailers, national retailers. We're going to have someone come in and talk about database corporate startups, and we're going to have, I think, a couple startup demos during our couple of hours of programming as well. So there's information here on the screen if you want to get the full schedule and register for that CMU event as well. With that, Jodi, Marios, I want to thank you again. I want to thank our audience for the questions that you've posed, particularly that last tough question, and we might consider that as a future upcoming ENAiBLE webinar. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.